Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
Oh, I'm ready. We're already recording.
I think you were like,
Happy
now
Tuesday.
you're kind of like, wait, let me ask you honestly. Now, I was trying specifically not to be funny or anything.
You were.
And now I'm wondering if you're starting
Yeah.
to grow dependent on something to laugh about, just to, like, maybe you associate the start of the show with something humorous. If that's the case, I have clown noses, I have squeaky toys, I have all sorts of, you know, you might be like a chihuahua. You need a squeaky toy to get you going, you know?
Here's the thing. I know I heard this great sermon about not avoiding things, like just to put one foot in front of the other. And so that's what I'm trying to do. But this is full disclosure. This is what happened. You're like, okay, I'm gonna press record. And you like did it so quick. So that I was like, what is going on? I just had to like catch my breath. And I don't know.
It's tough.
I don't know. I don't know.
You know, here's the thing is there's no real easy way to just start the show off. I mean, I'm sure the professionals have things like a countdown clock, and then the room goes silent right before the green light comes on. And it's different when it's just us on Zoom. So it's tougher.
No, it's great.
It's tougher for us. Yep.
I am going to consider this one of my labyrinths, and I am going to be determined to walk through it, and I am going to not start the show cackling.
There you go.
I am going to be so professional moving forward. So, ready? 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the MuseCast, everyone. Happy Tuesday. We're so glad that you are here. He is Dan Kent. I am Shawna Boren, and I am really excited for today's conversation. Why? Because Dan Kent, not Clark Kent, kind of confusing, I know, but Dan Kent really gave a nice sermon as a part of the Center of Hope series, and it was entitled Antifragile something. What was
Antifragile Faith? Yes. Well, you know, and it's funny that you say that, because I was kind of debating, like, you know, because I like Antifragile Faith because you've got that pseudo alliteration in there, but it's really kind of anti-fragile hearts is what we're creating, and our faith kind of emerges from that. But you know, I didn't want to get too nitpicky on it. So Antifragile Faith was what it was called.
Antifragile Faith. That is great. And I just want to say, just because I can't remember the title doesn't mean it didn't stand out to me or that it wasn't important. I, for whatever reason, get on this show and cannot for the life of me remember titles of stuff. So I don't know what that is. Something else I'm going to have to work through. However, you gave your sermon, Antifragile Faith. It was really great. And then it is the lead up to the conclusion of the series, which happens this weekend. And so today we get to hear a summary from Dan about Dan's sermon. We'll give you an opportunity, Dan, to tell us anything that you had to leave out, because we know things end up on the cutting room floor when we make our edits, and we're trying to tighten things up. So we'd love to hear that, as well as anything that you wanted to dive deeper into that maybe time prevented you from doing so. We'll have, maybe a question or two. We'll see what happens. And then we'll end with our nugget time. Sounds good? Great.
That sounds great.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to just jump in. I'm going to jump into the summary then. Let's just do that.
Let's do it.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, so the sermon is called Antifragile Faith. And I really, it's trying to think of, like, where is all of this kind of leading to, everything that Greg has been talking about, and like this finding joy in suffering, and what's beneath that. Like, how does one find joy in suffering? You have to have a certain kind of a structure inside of you. You have to have, not just anybody can find joy in suffering. So how do you get to that? And that was sort of what has kind of drove me as I was putting together this sermon. And I really liked this idea that I read in Nassim Taleb. Hold on, let me grab it. Let's see. There it is. There it is. It's called Antifragile. And he's sort of an economist, futurist, sort of mathematical wizard kind of guy. And he talked about he's looking at things that benefit from chaos, but in reality, they're kind of the idea underneath that is that there are some things that are anti-fragile, which means that not only do they not get weak under stress, but they actually get stronger under stress. And so he compares anti-fragility to fragility, which things that break easy under stress. And then strength are things that still break under stress, but they are less fragile than fragility. And then anti-fragile are things that can still break. I mean, we're all going to die, and we can have bad things happen to us, but there's something in there that actually grows from the stress. And so an example would be like our immune system. Our immune system gets stronger. The more foreign bodies it encounters, the more antibodies it can create. So the more we're exposed to in our environment, the stronger our immune system gets. And that's been happening over millions of years. And so we have just this really robust immune system. So I looked at faith, and I just looking at everything that Greg has been talking about, I just see that, that is the faith that God is calling us to, is a faith that actually gets stronger when it is under duress, or when it experiences pain or suffering and all of that. And when you look at things like the fruit of the Spirit, well, you see that. You see, like, you can only develop self-control, which is one of the fruits of the Spirit, to the extent that you have encountered temptations. You're not going to develop self-control without ever being tempted by anything. And so that's an example of what that looks like. And so I just looked at like, what does it mean to have this anti-fragile faith for our day-to-day life? And I thought, well, that means that we can encounter and we can face the problems in our life. We don't have to avoid the problems in our lives because we have this anti-fragile faith, and our faith will actually get stronger as we encounter problems. Whether we solve the problems or not, it's still good for our faith. And that's different than what a lot of people in the world experience. A lot of people, myself, we all do, and partly because we don't live out this anti-fragile faith, I think. But a lot of us tend to avoid our problems. We tend to avoid the things that we don't like about ourselves or whatever, instead of facing them. And so, but with an anti-fragile faith, I think that we can actually encounter it. And I was really struck by what Greg said last week, where he talked about how in America, we tend to put happiness as our primary pursuit. That's what we want out of life. We want happiness. But when we do that, it's interesting, because by putting happiness as the center of what we want out of life, we are guaranteeing a fragile faith, because just mathematically, we're putting something that is mutually exclusive to pain and suffering. We may never have, there's no like guarantee that we'll have happiness, but there is a guarantee that we'll have pain and suffering, and they're mutually exclusive. So we're guaranteeing to set ourselves up to be disappointed, to have despair. And since the rest of the world is also pursuing happiness, some of which are going to be more successful than us, and they're getting better at what we want most out of life, we're also setting ourselves up for envy. And I think that's what you see. You see disappointment and despair and envy, especially in this time of social media, where we can see like everybody else's supposed success in life. And it's just crushing. And a lot of that has to do with, we've put something that is inherently fragile at the center of what we want out of life. And but what this idea of anti-fragility, why it just struck me so much, is because I see this in the New Testament as this is the faith that God wants for us. And this is why James and Peter and Paul, and it's just this whole chorus of people saying that we can have joy in our suffering. We can have joy in our testing. We can have joy when we experience affliction, and because of this anti-fragility. And that means that we don't have to avoid our problems. Now, if happiness is at our center, of course we're going to avoid our problems, because it sucks confronting our problems. But with an anti-fragile faith that gets stronger as we face our problems, well, now we have every reason to face our problems. And I looked at the labyrinth as a symbol of confronting our problems. And a labyrinth is like a maze. It was an ancient sort of activity that you can do where it's like a hedge pattern that you walk through these hedges. It's different than a maze, because a maze, you can make choices. I could go left or right, or I could go straight. And the idea is that you could end up at a dead end. But with a labyrinth, there are no decisions. There's just this long winding kind of thing. And the goal is to get to the center and then out the other side. And it disorients you. So you start to question whether or not this is going to lead to anything. And it forces you to contemplate yourself and the situation that you're in. And it forces you to just keep putting one step in front of the other. And that really just captures about the nature of the problems that we have, and how we just have to, we can't avoid our labyrinths. I mean, we can, but it just destroys us if we do. And a lot of times it gets worse if we avoid them. But with anti-fragility, we can actually go in and face it. And then the final kind of note that I made is that with what God is doing in our lives, it requires us to participate. God's not going to pull us through the labyrinth. We have to choose. We have to be willing. And I just talked about a couple examples of God looking down for people looking up. Is he's looking for people who are willing, and he's going to use whoever is willing to participate. And we even see this in Jesus at the Mount of Olives, where he really doesn't want to walk through the labyrinth that is before him. He's like, Daddy, please take this burden away from me, but not as I will, but as you will. And so in other words, I'm willing. I don't like it, but I am willing. Now, if happiness was at Jesus' center, that first thing, I don't like it, then I'm out. I mean, that's because that's incompatible with what I have at my center. But what Jesus had at his center is God's will. And that's what God wants at our center. And when we see that what God's will is for us is to pursue Christ-likeness, and when we put Christ-likeness at our center, we see that Christ-likeness is not mutually exclusive to pain and suffering, but it actually helps us in that way. And then finally, I just ask, God is willing. I just showed that God is willing to heal us. God is willing to make us whole. God is willing to transform everything that we experience into something glorious. And I just left with the question, are we willing to participate? Are we willing to face our labyrinths? And then I considered a few of the excuses that we all kind of play around with. And then I tried to encourage people to at least commit to facing their labyrinth. Not that you might not even succeed in this life, but you at least will go down swinging, and you just commit to getting back up when you fall. And so that was sort of the sermon, is to try to live out this anti-fragile faith and to grow in that anti-fragility. And that's what I believe. Even if we fail at the things that we try, how I understand what's being said here is that those failures still make us stronger. And there's nothing there. I can't think of too many things that are more encouraging and inspiring to me than that idea that even failing in Christ-likeness makes me stronger. So that's my sermon.
I like it. Good job, Dan. I don't want to summarize your summary, so I will just bottom line kind of what my take home was from your sermon. And first of all, I want to say, of course, nice job. I think that I know that the series officially ends next week with Greg, but I do feel like you tied everything from the last several weeks together really nicely. And helped us to know, like, kind of what is the point of it all? Not the point of the series, but what is the point of all this stuff that we've been talking about? Like my daughter commented, she's like, oh, so we've been in the suffering unit, because she's in school. And so she thinks of things like in units. She's like, so we've been in the suffering unit. So I really felt like your sermon did a nice job of like just kind of pulling all those pieces together. I think my biggest take home was just the statement that you made about that the journey toward Christ-likeness is what God is calling us to. And that's a part of why we are here, and that's what we're striving for. And whatever gets in the way of that is that labyrinth that we need to walk through and keep going and putting one foot in front of the other. And that includes our suffering, and that includes our pain, anything that gets in the way of us becoming more and more Christ-like. And so it's not something that was caused by God, but it is something that he can work through. And so I just thought it was a really great way to kind of wrap all of that up. And it was really challenging. I love the part about the partnership, again, the consent, like God is willing. Are we willing? And that's a question I asked myself in that moment in your sermon. Am I willing to commit to put Christ-likeness at the center, to face whatever struggles come my way, and to walk through those labyrinths? And then I love that you had us think through, what are those labyrinths? What are our pains? And you encouraged us to not avoid it, to face it. And you did talk some about avoidance and why we avoid, but really the breakthrough comes when we face those things. And so I just was really appreciative of that. I do love that you made the disclaimer about, like, this isn't about picking yourself up by your bootstraps and just, going along. This is really about facing things with the help of the Spirit, so that we can come out on the other side. So I just want to thank you for your sermon. It was good.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that being said, I want to give you the opportunity, as we always do. Is there something that you had to leave out? I know you had kind of a hairy time the last 24 hours before or 12 hours before your sermon, which is always fun. It's always fun to rearrange things. And, so in all of that, if there's something that you left out, or maybe something that you would love to talk about a little bit more. And then before I hand that back over to you, I just want to say, I always love hearing about your mom. She's such an amazing woman. I'm just in awe of her, and way to go. Like 20 times.
Yeah. It's at least, I mean, it's, she is amazing. And I've barely even touched the water on how amazing she is. I've just dipped my toe in a little bit. She's got quite the life. I'll just give a little backstory. I had some ideas, of what I want to do, where I was looking at like experiencing the experience of suffering, and I kind of wrote out a bunch of stuff. And then on Wednesday, the Wednesday night, I was just kind of going over it, and it's like I didn't feel it. I didn't feel like this was really what God had, and so I scrapped it. So I spent all that time. I just scrapped it, and I'm like, no, I need something. I really want to. I feel like there's something more important here, and I just had this sense that there is something that is much more impactful here that I can do with this. And then Thursday morning, this idea of anti-fragility hit, and I ended up, but here's how it works with the sermon. You probably, maybe you experience this, maybe this is a problem with me. I don't know, but I worked out this idea, and there was all these layers to it. And it was sort of like the idea was getting lost in the weeds of what I was doing. And so Saturday night, we did the practice run through, and Greg and Paul were like, well, it's good, but you should really just start with this. And so basically took the thing at the end of my sermon and said, start with that and just build off of that. And so then Saturday night, I had to rewrite the whole thing again, and I was up till like midnight, rewriting it. And so it was like, I don't think I've worked harder on a sermon than I have on this one, with the exception of the first sermon I gave at Woodland Hills, which was a book that I spent 10 years writing. So that was more work for that one. But yeah, it was a lot of, it's like when the bad guys are chasing the spy, and he's trapped, and they're going to get him, and the big door is closing, and he just slides underneath, and the door closes right behind him. That's the way it felt. I just barely got it together. But there's a lot of stuff that I left out that
Well,
You know,
hey,
I was
really
yeah,
quickly,
please.
can I just clarify something for folks?
Yeah.
So first of all, that was a great, like, I love that image of just sliding in just in the nick of time. So you guys, the run through, I always like, do people even know what that is? So on Saturday evenings, whomever is speaking comes and we share the sermon, and there's a team there. And we do that for a couple of reasons. One, it's great because you get that feedback and to see if there's anything that you need to tweak, or, and it's also so that we know, like, timing, and we know about how long the sermon's going to be. But then also that run through is recorded so that if something were to happen between Saturday night and Sunday morning, we've at least got it that we could show it in the service. Yeah. And so anyway, I just think it's an interesting little behind the peak of the curtains for people to know about what that run through is. Yeah. And so this Saturday night, you did your run through, and Paul and Greg had some feedback. And so that caused you to go into re-edit mode. But what you came out with was great. But I know that you probably had to leave some things behind. So
yeah. Well, just to riff on that really quick too, it's Paul and Greg are definitely the key kind of players there every week, but Mary also usually has really good feedback. And this weekend, Jeremy and John, they do some of the tech stuff. They also had some really great helpful feedback. But I do love having teams of people to kind of give me feedback on it. But more than that, my experience, Shawna, is that, Greg has done over 1,000 sermons, and it's like, why wouldn't I want to learn as much as I can from Greg, not only about the feedback for my sermon, but just giving sermons in general, I mean, that's, and there's so much wisdom between him and Paul. I mean, holy cow, that's, you would need a couple barges just to carry that wisdom. If you, I don't know why you would want to carry it across the ocean, but for some reason you would need a couple barges. That's how much there is there. So anyway, So, I'll say the draft that I shared on Saturday, I really was caught by this scene on the Mount of Olives where Jesus he knows that bad things are coming. It's this darkness is encroaching him from all sides. He knows that the party is kind of over, in the sense that, the good times are done now, until the resurrection, at least. And he knows that he's here. He's about to face why he's here. And just that scene where he's, first of all, just the fact that he asks, if this cup, if it's possible for this cup to pass, please let it pass. Which just by itself is mind-blowing, that Jesus acknowledges that God does not force his will through, but God works with possible things. And that by itself is so profound. In other words, when we experience suffering and evil, it's not God. That's what God is working with. That is what God is working through. That is what God is going to redeem us from and rescue us from. And I just think that is so profound. And the fact that God incarnate in Jesus is even his willingness is important to what God is doing. I just think that, because people talk about God's will, and you're right, God's will is the most important thing that there is, except that his will just so happens to be that we also will. And so the only way to live out God's will is if I am also willing, because that's what his will is. And I just think that is so important, and it really pushes back against all temptations to be passive, because the whole point of everything is that God, he says this in Acts, God is hoping that we will reach out for him. God is, in the Old Testament, over 100 times, God is looking for people who are seeking him, and seek God like a treasure and he will be found by you. And there's just over and over again, he's looking for people who are willing. And I just think that is so profound. I would say I probably left out a whole bunch of other stuff, but other than this one thing that I do want to specify, when I talk about facing our labyrinths, and I talk about things like achieving this anti-fragile faith, I do want to be clear that I don't want to leave the impression that again, this is kind of the pick yourself up by your bootstrap stuff. If you face your challenges, you will overcome them. I don't want to say that that will happen in this life. And in fact, that's why at the end, when I closed, part of doing this is we have to really believe in the promises that death is not the end, and that God will transform everything that we do here into something glorious. Meaning that even if we don't succeed at conquering whatever labyrinths we have while we're in this life, we trust that the effort that we give means something, and it does something good for us, even if that good thing isn't conquering the labyrinth. And then also, no matter what happens, no matter how far we fall short, God will still transform that into something glorious. And I do want to be clear on that. And that leaves us with, I think, just a really important choice, which is, how do I feel about throwing myself at a task that I might fail at during this life? And I think out of the feedback that I got, where people were most motivated, and these were older people, just this idea of going down swinging really like captured their hearts. Like, yeah, I want to go down swinging, because we get in this mindset where we're very prudent. We're very prudent about saying, okay, what's the best use of my time here? Well, this I could probably accomplish, but that I couldn't accomplish. But that's all pragmatics. That's all like, trying to, fit it into my schedule, and it's very practical. But we're being called to do something because it's right, because that's what God wants. And so we should be asking, what is the right thing that I should be doing? What is the Christ-like thing that I should be doing? And if it's to face this labyrinth, then I'm going to face the labyrinth whether I have time in my life to conquer it or not, because that is the right thing to do, not the prudent thing to do, not what maybe not even what I'm ready to do yet, but that is that should be the criteria that we make our choices by. So I guess that's probably the best that I could say that I left out. There's a bunch of other stuff too, but yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Dan. I think there are two things that are standing out to me. One, I'm remembering that I didn't mention before, and it was the one moment in your sermon where I was disappointed in you. And I feel like it's the MuseCast, so we can be honest about this stuff.
Uh-oh.
Dan, your lack of ability to handle spicy foods is a problem, and it needs to be addressed. I think you need to not avoid it, and I think you need to conquer that, because spicy foods are glorious and you are missing out, my friend.
Okay.
Very disappointed.
Okay. It hurts. Spicy food hurts. It's like designed to hurt your tongue. Like, I don't get it.
I love spicy food. Poor Scott. There was a quick little tangent. There was like early in our marriage, I get on kicks, like when I'm seasoning foods, and I was on this fresh jalapeno kick, which I still love fresh jalapenos. I'm just more selective now, but I was putting them in everything, like breakfast tacos and salads and just whatever I could. And he's just like, babe, I love you, but this is too much. It was just so anyway, but seriously, the thing that stood out to me during your sermon, and it was standing out to me even more so when you were just talking about some of the things that, in the process that maybe you didn't talk about as much as you wanted to, was just the picture of the humanity of Jesus, that I think sometimes we forget. Like, we know that he, was fully God and fully man, but I think we kind of lean on the fully God piece of it, and we don't understand, or maybe it's just me. Like, I think we forget that he was fully human. And so as a human, as a man he knew what was coming, like you said, and he had this moment of just raw honesty, like, Dad, man, oh man, if this could happen any other way, that'd be so great. I think that's something that can encourage us all. Like, we're going to face things that we don't want to face, that are difficult to face for a variety of reasons. And it's not as if God is saying, well, suck it up, buttercup. Like,
yeah, right.
I think he relishes in that moment of just vulnerable, like, I don't want to do this. Like, is there any other way? And many times the only way is through, and that's the tough part. But again, if we can have that picture of Christ likeness that we're striving toward, it does help. So I just thought that part was really beautiful. So I went from slight disappointment to great respect and admiration.
Good.
So we landed in a good spot. All right.
Good.
All right. So in regards to anti-fragility, I would love if you could answer this question, and it's going to look different depending on who you are. So I know that, but what are some ways in which you would say, Dan, that we can have this anti-fragile faith formed in us? Mm-hmm. Because I don't know that it's going to come naturally or right out of the gate. It's something that I think moment by moment, we're going to need to strive towards. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I think I have lots of thoughts on that. I think definitely the gratitude piece is probably the highest leverage way to just remember that, look, there are no circumstances that I cannot be thankful in, which means that no matter how sucky my situation is, there is some potential there, or at least God can transform that into something good. And so I think gratitude is the highest leverage, broadest sort of thing to develop. But I also think that when you look at the fruits of the Spirit, and like I said last week, when you might have been a couple weeks ago, I don't remember, but when you look at the commands and the imperative statements in the New Testament, I think all of those things get at this anti-fragility. For instance, in Philippians, and we've been in Philippians a lot during this series. This series could almost be a Philippians series. And a little birdie told me that this weekend we're going to get more Philippians. So, but when you look at Philippians and you look at chapter 4, where kind of the culmination of everything Paul is saying, and there's a lot of anti-fragility stuff in there, but a culmination of that, he starts off saying, okay, now with all of this, let your gentleness show. And if you think about gentleness, if you are gentle with people, that is a sign of security. Whereas if you're angry at people, you feel threatened. And if you belittle people, that means you feel threatened. And all of these things that are not gentle are signs of insecurity and a signs of you feel threatened. But gentleness represents somebody who is not threatened. And since we have an anti-fragile faith, we are not threatened. And so gentleness and being gentle with each other is a way, just like gratitude, of living out this anti-fragility. And definitely, I think the anti-fragility has to do with putting Christ-likeness at the center, but we also have to walk that out and live that out. And Paul and Peter and James, they all give us these imperative commands that I think describe and give us like a visual model of what that looks like to live that out. Gentleness is a good example. So those are just a couple of quick off the cuff that I'm thinking of. Do you have any ideas of that you would contribute to that?
I don't know that I have anything that I would add. I asked the question because I'm asking myself the question as well. I do think that as we are cultivating that relationship with God that he wants from us, like you said, he's not a robot, he's not karma, he's not this, he's someone who craves human interaction and relationship with us. As we are becoming more and more aware of that and alive to that, and we're leaning into that, I think that helps to strengthen our faith because we know who our faith is in. I think if we have a picture of God, which we always say this, if we have a picture of God as austere, as domineering, as judgmental, as waiting to whack us over the head with every mistake, then that causes some fear within us. And then we're back to the fragility of our faith, right? But I feel like as we are confident in who he is and who we are in light of who he is, that helps to make our faith stronger and
That's
anti-fragile. Right. And in that, because I can honestly say the times that I've had struggle and the times that I've had pain that I've had to deal with, it has made me stronger. So I do think about the way you started your sermon talking about the anti-fragility. Actually, it's when it gets strengthened through duress, not, doesn't break down through duress. So to think that our pain and our struggle and our suffering could make us stronger is kind of, it's a beautiful way to look at it. So
Definitely. Really quick.
One more quick. Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just thinking of the idea of going down swinging, and I think that's part of why I've just loved so much seeing Jimmy Carter doing these Habitat for Humanity projects when he's 98 years old. I mean, isn't that cool?
I know, so amazing. It's like, man, what am I doing? Like, right?
Exactly,
he is
right.
just yeah, agreed. Okay, really quick question before we head to nugget time, Dan. I hope it's quick. What you talked a lot about just taking that next step, and you even had a quote there at the end that we're having trust that it was an actual quote, right? Because you didn't have the
that's right.
Exactly.
Salvitor ambulando.
Yes, that. Not going to say it. However, why do you say, like, just take that next step? Why is that so important? Like, just even if we don't feel it, even if we're struggling with it, like, just to take that next step. Why do you think that is so important?
I think there's probably different people have different, everyone's different in this, I guess. But I think that for various reasons, Christ-likeness can be very overwhelming. I mean, because we're so far away, and I kind of reflected on that myself, just looking at like the martyrs and I'm not there. Look at me. I'm afraid of spicy food. So you're farther than I am. So you're farther than I am. So, but I just thinking of like how big that is, and between that and the discouragement of how far it is from here to there, on top of which I think a lot of people fall into passivity and they wait for God to, do this stuff for them. But God requires participation. And so for that, I think encouraging people to just take a step. I think the way that Augustine said it is the cure is in the walking, the cure is in taking the step. And because it's when we participate, that's when the Holy Spirit is active in our lives. And so I think that taking that step is important. But like a lot of people don't even know what the first step would even be. And so, the first step is to just commit to facing it. And then maybe the next step would be finding out, what more about what it is. If it's loneliness, for instance, if that's what you want to face, then maybe it could be talking to a friend about it. It could be watching YouTube videos. It could be, anything. There's 1,000 different possibilities. But that first step is so important. And I think what I've seen is, finding out the size of the beast a lot of times is really helpful. And a lot of people don't even get to that point. They just know there's a scary beast in the woods and they avoid. And but by taking the step of facing it, at least you know exactly what it actually is, how big the beast actually is. Because what I have found is that a lot of times the beast is not as ferocious as we think the beast is in our heads when we actually face it. And so that's why taking that step is so important.
I love it. That's good, Dan. We can't get any closer if we are just paralyzed in the stillness of it. So just, I like that. Taking a step. All right, sir. It is nugget time. I'm going to share my nugget first, and then you are going to close us out with your nugget because you have a verse, I think. So, I think you do. Okay.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Okay. So my nugget really ties into actually what you were just sharing in your answer to the question about the importance of taking that step. I think we've been very clear that Christ likeness is the goal, and whatever it is that is that's standing in between us and that goal is what we need to try to walk through with the help of the Spirit. And I think many times as we're trying to figure out what is it that we're walking through, like you just said, we just know it's a big monster and it's scary and we don't even know, we can't even identify it. And so my encouragement is to spend some time in your lives and evaluate your heart and your life and maybe ask yourself and the Lord, like, what are my struggles? What are my pains? What are the things that I need to walk through? Because I have found in my experience personally and people in my life that many times we're so afraid of dealing that we've just kind of put it away. Like we don't even remember the thing. And I'm not saying you have to like judge up every painful thing in your life, but if there's some things that you feel like are keeping you from this goal of being more and more Christ-like, I think the Lord would want to reveal that to you so that you can begin to process through that. So you can begin to get healing from that. And so I think just spending some time consistently evaluating the things in your life, and just seeing where is something that maybe pops up that you need to deal with. And as painful as it is, and as hard as it may be, ask the Lord to show you how you can, in those moments, as you're trying to deal with that, see the good, and how can you experience the joy, like we've heard from Scripture. And just to know that it doesn't mean that it didn't matter, it didn't happen, but I think if we ask and pray, he can reveal to us and show us the good that can come from the struggle. And so I think just spend time being honest with yourself, with your heart, with your life, being honest before the Lord, and allowing him to help us, and that the Spirit to help us continue to just put one foot in front of the other and walk through.
Yeah. That's great. And in particular, I appreciated the statement of, devote some time to it. And just because that is a good first step. You know what? I need to set some time aside. That might be the very first step. And now you're walking, and one foot in front of the other. And so I love that advice. For me, I keep thinking of this verse, and it's sort of one of these pet peeve verses of mine because I see it in all these preposterous situations. And it's also in Philippians. That's where we're really gravitating around that, orbiting it. But I've seen like pictures of mountain climbers, and with this verse, Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And he's climbing the mountain. Or I've seen another one. I think it was a poster, and it was this volleyball player just jumping up above the net, about to spike the volleyball. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And I just thought, I've always thought that is that the point, that like God will help me accomplish my athletic goals. I mean, it seemed kind of strange. Like if God strengthens me, I will climb a mountain. And it seemed a little off there. And as I've been reading the context of this, I've realized that what Paul is actually saying here, when you read the verses right before it, is he's actually saying, my anti-fragile faith God actually gives me this anti-fragile faith, which strengthens me, not to accomplish goals, but to endure whatever I experience. And so when he says that I can do all things through him who strengthens me, what he's really saying is that I can endure all things through him who strengthens me. And you see that when you read the context. So starting in verse 11, he says, I have learned to be content with whatever I have. So no matter what the situation is, I'm content. I know what it is like to have little, and I know what it is like to have plenty, both extremes. All of the possible circumstances of having, I've experienced it, and I know what that's like. In any and all circumstances, I have learned the secret of being well fed and of going hungry, of having plenty and of being in need. I can do all of these things through him who strengthens me. In other words, all of the circumstances that I could possibly experience, I can endure that through him who strengthens me. Through this anti-fragile faith, through having Christ-likeness at the center, there's nothing that I can face, plenty or in need, rich or poor. I can take it all on because I have Christ-likeness at the center, and that gives me this anti-fragile faith. And I just think that understanding that context totally reframes that verse in a way that I think makes it less preposterous and much more, I think, endearing and inspiring, really, in my opinion. So that's my verse, and that's what I got.
I love it. That was the perfect bow to cap this conversation and to conclude your sermon. So good job, sir. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We appreciate this, like I say every time, because we really do appreciate your engagement and just chatting with you guys and the questions that you send in. It's just really great. Don't forget that the series concludes this next weekend with Greg. And so I think it's going to be a really great wrap up to everything. Yeah. And then circle back with Dan and I next Tuesday as we continue the conversation. Yes, sir.
He's fired up about this weekend. So I don't know exactly what he's got coming, but he seemed there's a little pep in his step about this weekend. So it could be a good one.
Okay. All right. You guys be ready. Be ready. In the meantime, if you want to discuss Dan's sermon more, I don't know why you wouldn't want to. We've got folks that meet together during gathering groups, and there are some happening tonight, Tuesday night, 6:30 p.m. via Zoom, and then tomorrow, Wednesday at 10 a.m. via Zoom. Discuss this. Go a little deeper if you like with other folks from Woodland Hills. And these happen with people from across the nation and around the world. So it's a really cool time.
That is cool.
All right, you guys, we will check you later. Thanks so much for tuning in.